Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in the matter now pending shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
Would you please state your full name?
Jeffrey Epstein, and my residence address is 6100 Red Hook Boulevard in Virgin Islands.
Have you ever been convicted of a crime?
Yes.
I was unaware that I was going to be alone with him. I thought I was going to die.
100 vulnerable teenagers and young women trapped in his depraved web. Tonight, the Epstein Files, the latest on who knew what in the biggest sex trafficking ring in history. His elite circle of the wealthy and powerful on notice as thousands of damning new court documents are unsealed.
They will contain the names of people associated with Jeffrey Epstein.
Prince Andrew and the former President Bill Clinton have been named.
More are expected to come out.
In the last few weeks, they've linked Epstein to some very famous names and exposed some very sordid details.
There are videos that exist.
We've been investigating this scandal since Jeffrey Epstein's death in 2019. This is where Jeffrey Epstein served his sentence. That he can still shock is extraordinary.
I won't stop fighting. I will never be silenced.
As you'll see, this monster's tentacles continue to reach from beyond the grave.
In Jeffrey Epstein's case, the details of his final night have been scrutinized endlessly. But sometimes, the most haunting truths aren't in what the footage reveals. They're in what it doesn't. A faint sound just outside the frame, a missing minute in the recording, a lone figure in an orange jumpsuit walking upstairs, never to be seen coming back down. Officials have maintained that nothing unusual happened. The official report calls Epstein's death a suicide. Yet the gaps, the things we can't see, the moments erased, have left a trail of questions. For some, those missing pieces hint at something much larger, something so unsettling that it continues to spark debate even years later. The Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan, or MCC, was once considered one of the most secure detention facilities in the United States. It housed terrorists, high-level criminals, and figures who, by all accounts, could never be allowed to slip through the cracks. Within its walls, every movement was supposed to be controlled, every corridor monitored. But insiders, from former staff to legal observers, painted a different picture. By 2019, MCC was an aging institution with failing infrastructure, staff shortages, and equipment that didn't always work as intended. According to reports, the prison often relied on overtime to cover shifts, leaving correctional officers exhausted and vulnerable to mistakes. Epstein was placed in the Special Housing Unit, better known as the SHU. This wing was designed for inmates considered at risk or requiring special protection. It was divided into multiple tiers, A, B, and L, each with an upper and lower level. Epstein's cell was located on the upper level of the L tier. Reaching that cell wasn't simple. One would have to pass through the main gate, move across the common area, ascend a narrow staircase, and finally, unlock a gate that only correctional officers could access. The design was intended to ensure security, but as we'll see, the very design also created blind spots, physical zones that cameras never covered. If there's one thing that prisons rely on to maintain order, it is surveillance. Cameras are the silent witnesses of everything. Fights in the yard, movements in hallways, the slow passing of hours in solitary wings. In theory, surveillance should have captured every second of Jeffrey Epstein's final night. But the reality was different. According to reports, at least 2 cameras positioned outside Epstein's tier were malfunctioning. One was pointed at the wrong angle. Another had footage corrupted during the exact window of time that would have mattered most. The remaining cameras, while operational, were not aimed at the upper cells. They could only see the lower level of the L tier and parts of the corridor. That meant Epstein's cell, ironically one of the most high-profile cells in the country, was positioned in a blind spot. Movements up and down the staircase, or anything occurring right outside his door, were invisible to the record. Prison officials later insisted that this was nothing unusual, that older buildings often had limited camera coverage. But critics argued that the failure was too convenient, especially given Epstein's notoriety and the fact that he had reportedly attempted self-harm weeks earlier. On the night of August 9, 2019, 2 correctional officers were assigned to monitor the SHU. Records show that they were both working overtime, having already covered long shifts earlier that week. According to official documents, the officers admitted to falling asleep at various points during the night. They were supposed to check Epstein's cell every 30 minutes. That protocol was not followed. For nearly 3 hours, no guard reportedly set foot near his door. Instead, surveillance showed the officers sitting at their desks, browsing the internet and filling out paperwork. Later, prosecutors alleged that they falsified the logs to make it appear as though the checks had been done. When asked why such lapses occurred, prison staff pointed to exhaustion, chronic understaffing, and the overwhelming stress of working in MCC. Critics, however, claimed that the guards' failure was too extreme to be accidental. For them, this wasn't simple negligence. It was either complicity or deliberate blindness. In the world of corrections, every second matters. When reviewing prison incidents, investigators often rely on footage that can pinpoint who was where and when. That's why the gaps in the surveillance archive from Epstein's final night raised so many alarms. Reports confirmed that the camera outside his unit stopped recording during a crucial 40-minute window. Technicians later claimed the footage had been accidentally erased due to a technical glitch. Others described it as corrupted data. The result was the same. The very period in which Epstein's death occurred was missing from the official record. It wasn't the first time such an event had happened in 1250. Former inmates described the prison as outdated, with wiring failures, old servers, and systems that often froze. But never before had a glitch coincided with the custody of one of the most notorious inmates in the United States. Amid these gaps, attention turned to what little footage did exist. One camera, positioned farther down the corridor, briefly captured a blurry figure ascending the metal stairs that led to the upper tier. The figure wore what appeared to be standard-issue orange clothing, the same color assigned to many inmates in MCC. The problem? At that time of night, no inmate was authorized to move freely between tiers. Movement in the SHU required direct escort by officers, and there were no records of such an escort that evening. Some speculated the figure was another prisoner, mistakenly let out of his cell. Others argued it could have been a staff member wearing orange, perhaps a maintenance worker, or someone borrowing an inmate jumpsuit. Conspiracy theorists suggested something more sinister, that the figure was deliberately erased from official narratives, their presence too inconvenient to explain. When news of the missing footage and the mysterious figure spread, theories exploded. Some argued this was evidence of outside interference, that Epstein was silenced because he knew too much about powerful people. Others dismissed the claims as sensational, insisting that camera glitches, tired guards, and paperwork errors were simply the chaotic norm inside MCC. The truth was harder to pin down. What investigators could not ignore was how many systems failed simultaneously. The cameras, the guards, the logs, the protocols. Each layer of protection broke down at the exact moment one man's life ended in custody. After Epstein's death, his body was transported to the New York City Medical Examiner's office for a full autopsy. The official conclusion, released days later, was blunt. The cause of death was suicide by hanging. The report noted fractures in the hyoid bone, as well as other signs consistent with self-inflicted ligature strangulation. For the authorities, this was supposed to be the final word. Suicide fit the narrative of a man facing the rest of his life in prison, stripped of wealth, reputation, and influence. Yet for many, the conclusion raised more questions than it answered. Dr. Michael Baden, a renowned forensic pathologist hired by Epstein's family, challenged the ruling. He pointed out that the specific pattern of fractures, especially in the hyoid bone, was more often associated with homicidal strangulation than suicide. His assessment reignited the storm of speculation. Critics of Baden argued that while fractures in the hyoid were less common in suicides, they were not impossible, particularly in older men. Epstein, at 66, fit that demographic. Still, the fact that such a prominent expert publicly contradicted the official finding made headlines across the globe. When the phrase, "Epstein didn't kill himself," began circulating online, it quickly evolved into a cultural meme. What started as dark humor transformed into a slogan of skepticism, reflecting widespread distrust in official institutions. From late-night comedy shows to political debates, the line was repeated everywhere. For many, it was less about the man himself and more about what his death symbolized. The suspicion that justice bends for the powerful and that truths inconvenient to elites are buried. In response to the uproar, the Department of Justice pledged a comprehensive review of MCC's procedures. Politicians across party lines demanded answers. International media outlets framed the incident as a test of American credibility. If the U.S. could not safeguard such a high-profile inmate, what did it say about its justice system? Still, no review, report, or testimony could fully extinguish the doubts. Each official statement was met with counter-arguments, each attempt at closure only deepening the sense that something was fundamentally broken. In the immediate aftermath of Epstein's death, attention turned sharply toward the 2 correctional officers assigned to monitor him that night. Investigations revealed that instead of making their required rounds, they had allegedly been browsing the internet, shopping online, and even falling asleep. Both officers were later charged with falsifying records, accused of signing documents claiming they had checked Epstein's cell when they had not. While they eventually avoided prison time through plea deals and community service, the case left a permanent stain on the reputation of the Metropolitan Correctional Center. The scandal quickly escalated to the halls of Congress. Lawmakers demanded explanations from the Bureau of Prisons and the Department of Justice. Testimonies described a prison in crisis, understaffed, overworked, and plagued by years of budget cuts. Officials argued that Epstein's death was not the result of a sinister plot, but a tragic consequence of institutional neglect. Yet for critics, this explanation sounded too convenient. A man so high profile, with connections to royalty, billionaires, and political leaders, dying under such sloppy circumstances, it was a scenario that begged disbelief. By 2021, the Metropolitan Correctional Center itself was shut down, officially for renovations. But many saw it as a symbolic closure, an institution tainted beyond repair by scandal. For critics of the justice system, MCC's downfall was a metaphor, a fortress of secrecy finally crumbling under the weight of its own failures. Despite official rulings, the theories surrounding Epstein's death continue to circulate. Some believe he was silenced to protect powerful figures implicated in his alleged crimes. Others argue his death was staged, and that he may still be alive, hidden away. While such claims lack hard evidence, their persistence reflects a deeper truth. Many people simply do not trust the institutions tasked with delivering justice. In the vacuum of trust, speculation thrives. Epstein's case became less about one man's fate and more about a society grappling with corruption, privilege, and the limits of accountability. The Epstein case did more than expose one man's crimes or mysterious death. It ignited a cultural reckoning. For millions, it became the ultimate example of how wealth and influence can twist the very institutions meant to protect the vulnerable. His name has since become shorthand for corruption, cover-ups, and the chilling ease with which accountability can be evaded. The distrust it left behind is almost as significant as the crimes themselves. Surveys and public opinion polls in the years that followed showed a marked decline in confidence in both the justice system and government oversight. The sense that the powerful play by different rules was no longer just a cynical belief. It was a conclusion supported by headlines, court failures, and unanswered questions. Few scandals in modern history have embedded themselves into pop culture the way Epstein's death did. The phrase "Epstein didn't kill himself" spread across the internet, appearing on late-night talk shows, in memes, even in live TV pranks. What started as a cynical joke revealed something deeper. Comedy became the vehicle for expressing widespread doubt about official narratives. While some dismissed the meme as internet noise, cultural analysts noted that humor had become a form of protest. By laughing, people were also signaling defiance, refusing to let the story die quietly. Epstein's case had leapt from courtrooms and headlines into everyday conversation, turning tragedy into a shorthand for mistrust. At its core, the Epstein saga forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. How can society ensure accountability when the accused has limitless resources? How do we rebuild institutions that have been hollowed out by neglect and corruption? Experts argue that reforms must address not only prison conditions, but also the larger structures of privilege that allow predators to operate unchecked for years. Transparency, independent oversight, and the courage to prosecute without fear or favor, these are the principles repeatedly cited as the only path forward. Yet whether such reforms will ever come remains uncertain. Epstein's death left behind a cautionary tale, but also an open wound. Until institutions regain credibility, the public will continue to fill the silence with speculation, theories, and doubt. In the end, the story of Jeffrey Epstein is not just about one man's crimes, nor the mystery of his final hours. It is about power, who has it, who abuses it, and who is shielded from its consequences. The unanswered questions may never fade, because they touch on something larger than Epstein himself: the fragility of justice in a world where influence often outweighs truth.